Thank you for joining me. My name is Mukta Ranpura, and I have Christopher Chapple, and we're both joining you from Southern California, just in Los Angeles. And Chris is going to be talking to us today about grief and yogic practice. Chris, I'd like to give you the chance to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mukta. Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris Chapple, and I'm the founding director of the Master of Arts in Yoga Studies at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, where I also serve as the Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology.
So thank you for making time and joining us on this Yoga for Unity platform. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment and just settle in and pray and just acknowledge all those people who are suffering with grief and that have, had many losses. So if that's okay with you, can we just, acknowledge that for a few seconds? So let's close our eyes and bring our awareness to our hearts, realizing that the heart is the source of love and life. We're all connected through the heart. And in this heart space, we acknowledge the grief and your loss. And we hold space for that process and send you love, light, and prayers for your healing. Thank you.
This brings to mind a song that I wrote many years ago, and the refrain goes like this: life and love and circumstance, these worlds change, they do not last. So life and love, the great gift we receive and the great gift we give. Circumstance, however, brings both joy, sukha, ananda, bliss, and circumstance, our daily lives. Circumstance brings us into a place of loss, into a place of dukkha. To be human is to suffer. To be human is to experience pain. To be human is to be rent asunder again and again and again. Sometimes it's real. We physically receive injury. A loved one turns away. And we also suffer daily from our worries and woes, some of which really are not real. As Mark Twain famously said, the worst things in my life never happened. But we're in this rather remarkable moment around the globe of having experienced collectively 7 billion people plus experiencing this pandemic, the death of untold millions within a short span of a couple of years, and so many lost hours of interface, of connection. For young people, lost hours of learning in the company of their peers. What can yoga give us? Now, the Buddha taught famously at Sarnath. After wandering for 49 days in the glory of his freedom, he had achieved nirvana sitting under that Bodhi tree. And as he settled and reunited with old friends and followers, he came forward with this profound truth. Sarvam, everything. Dukkam is a little bit off. Could be a minor annoyance, or it could be the tragedy of death, or a tragic death. And all deaths are tragic. In the Isha Upanishad, the Isha Upanishad, the shortest, perhaps the most cryptic of those beautiful Sanskrit texts, says that nasty people experience a darkness. However, people of goodwill go to a place of even deeper darkness, a place that I like to think of as akin to what St. John the Cross called the dark night of the soul. So the task becomes in yoga, Hayam Dukkam Anagatam. How can we move toward avoiding the pain of the future? So that's the beginning.
So, you touched on several important points. I mean, definitely post-COVID, as we're beginning to integrate into normal life, there is this enormous collective grief that people are suffering through, that they're having to process, especially due to the isolation, not being able to mourn correctly, not being able to go physically to a funeral. So is there any yogic practices that can help bring some closure or some integration in such cases where the community support was not really available because of this isolation?
Yes. My heart goes out particularly to the young people who experienced the loss of a grandparent, could not attend the funeral, or even more tragically in my extended family, the funeral did convene. They did their best, yet nonetheless, the funeral itself became a spreader event and people fell ill. So what do we do? In normal times, our developmental stages bring us to the dawning realization of a great truth given in the Mahabharata. As the 5 Pandava brothers gather at this lake, and one by one, 4 of them perish because they refuse to listen and wait before slaking their thirst. But Yudhishthira, the eldest, whose father, none other than the God righteousness, Dharma, spiritual teachings, all of that gives him a little bit of remove. And when the voice, which turns out to be the voice of his own father, says, "Answer my questions before you drink from this lake." And Yudhishthira solves riddle after riddle after riddle until finally the question comes, what is the greatest mystery of human life? And the mystery is, as answered correctly by Yudhishthira, we know in our head that we will die, that our parents will die, that our friends will die. But in our heart and in our heads, We live as if we are eternal. And I love this story.
Irony.
Yeah, it's a great irony. And through this solving of that riddle, Yudhishthira is able to restore his brothers back to life, carry on. And what we learn from this story is twofold. One, it's true. We do have this sense of eternity within. And we learn in the Bhagavad Gita from Lord Krishna that yes, the soul cannot be killed. We learn from the texts of Jainism that we have always been here. We will always be here. In the middle, we're caught in circumstance. And what we need to move toward in order to bring some solace and comfort is acceptance. How do we arrive at acceptance? We ask that question, who am I? Who are you? Why do you do what you do? And why do I do what I do?
Wow, this is so deep. There's so many hidden pearls there. So I want to sift that out. You started off talking about, somebody turning away from us in terms of separation, and then going into loss, and then the cycle of life and death, and then the purpose of really who we are. And those are all really very deep, deep aspects of actually our being. And so how does yoga come into play, and how do we reconcile, and integrate the cycle of loss, the cycle of death, and be able to be one again within ourselves through this process?
Yeah, there's two great words that start with from the yoga tradition. They're the bookends of the yamas. And the yamas, I love that word yama. It's also the name of the god of death.
Correct.
And what we do with the first, ahimsa, is that we take up a demeanor that seeks to minimize the harm that we cause. And as human beings, every time our foot falls on the ground, we're disturbing the biome in some way or another. Every time we take in a meal, some life, whether animal, vegetable, whatever, is lost. And what we can do as human beings, gifted with will, which has this beautiful appellation in Sanskrit, parusha, that we can, from the depths of our soul, make decisions to minimize the ways in which we beat ourselves up with our thoughts. And the places where we put ourselves, we can no longer go to those places of potential harm, ahimsa. And then the other bookend of these great vows is aparigraha. And aparigraha speaks to the human propensity for clinging and grasping and grabbing. And graha literally means to grab, to grasp, to hold on to. And with aparigraha, this is a universal sign for peace. We release that grip. We release that holding and grasping. And by letting go, we are able to let be.
So beautiful form of acceptance, coming back to that.
It is. And when I was in India in 1989, and this those of you who are in India and of a certain age, you will remember this is before the liberalization of the economy. Life was far simpler than it is today. And I was at Jain Vishwabharati in Ladnu in Rajasthan in the company of Acharya Tulsi, Acharya Mahaprajna, Acharya Mahashraman. And they invited me into a room where an elder nun had taken a vow of total ahimsa and aparigraha.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
She had been diagnosed with a terminal kidney disease, and the whole community had conferred and approved this octogenarian for entry into the final fast. And as I sat there in a crowded room and heard through S.L. Gandhi's translations the interchange, Acharya Tulsi's happiness at her resolve, his invitation to me to regard her peaceful demeanor. And he said, isn't it better to invite the inevitable in full awareness in a state of prayer, so that when you take that final breath, the next breath you take up will carry the memories of this goodness. And I was a young man then.
That's so
and
beautiful.
I had not, it was so beautiful, but I was so unprepared. I was
being conscious of that moment of death.
I was still in my early-ish 30s, had not really lost as yet. And this prepared me for the grief to come. And it educated me about this inevitability of change.
It's a very profound place to be able to witness and experience how somebody could willingly let go and accept their final stages of death consciously. Are there any, we're not all there yet, and people are so caught up in their material life, in the way that their attributes or their lifestyle dictates, that consciousness level is not there in terms of that acceptance, that full acceptance, that yes, we all know death will come one day, but in terms of preparedness, in terms of recognizing, because I know for sure during COVID, I had lost a lot of people, in that 2 years, both from my family side and my extended family side and my husband's side. And there was such a trauma of not being able to say certain things or do certain things, or so there's also this this guilt or this heaviness, but there's also this acceptance that death is final and you really can't do anything at that moment other than accept. So how do we integrate that in a pleasant way, in a way
Right.
that is digestible, because I'm sure there are lots of people out there that have these kind of regrets or kind of hole because of not being able to mourn. And so how does this yogic practice, or how does yoga play a part in bringing this inner integration, where we can say consciously that, listen, we are human, we went through that cycle, now let's embrace the next part of this.
It's such a wonderful invitation to build for ourselves a ritual, and for those who have passed a ritual. One of the gifts of the pandemic is that now everybody has discovered the capacity to connect through Zoom. So yes, to memorialize, I have a meditation group I've been meeting with every Thursday morning, group led, and one of our members passed during COVID. And it was so tender to remember and to talk about her, both in large group and small group. And in some ways, the intimacy of that moment sufficed to bring some healing to us who had known her for so many years, and to her surviving sister and sister-in-law.
Sure.
In 89, as I said, I was young and naive. In 90, one of my students very famously collapsed and died of a heart attack at a basketball tournament on our campus. And our whole community was in shock.
Sure.
And this reality of death, for 2 semesters, Hank Atherts had studied with me and consulted and conferred with me. It was in 1990. And then in 1991, my best friend died of AIDS. Another close friend died of breast cancer. My sister-in-law died in a car accident. And any illusion of immortality was shattered.
Yeah. Yes, obviously. It must have been quite traumatic.
Yeah. And on the world of the exterior, my wife and I pledged to help the family. She had left 2 small children under the age of 7, and for year after year after year, we would visit and just reminisce about the mom. And I remember on the more subtle level, on the dream level, my wife and I had taken the boat to Catalina, and we were having our big sort of romantic weekend away, and the kids were with friends. And then my friend who had died sort of came to me in dream and said, "What are you going to do?" And it was just a great incentive. This was the friend who had brought me to meditation, brought me to Quaker meeting, brought me into that room where I met and married my wife. And out of that dream came really a lifetime of a commitment to sharing and writing. So what can we do? We can create small rituals of remembrance, whether on Zoom, or one of the things that I've often done is to light a candle for 49 days following a death. And we can also honor that person by integrating the gift of their life into our own life and work.
So remembering them kindly and creating a way forward through their memory.
Exactly.
I know you have a background in Jainism and Buddhism and Vedanta. And is there anything that you'd like to share from these philosophies on, particularly on how they deal with grief?
Yeah. So different in each tradition.
Sure.
Buddhist tradition, there is a 49-day period. The accumulated karma that remained unresolved and still bound tight flows during this 49-day period, enters what is called by the Tibetans bardo. And the body is offered up to the sky in Tibet, and the carrion, the vultures, carry the flesh away, and only the bones remain. But the body clearly is gone, but that energetic force for 49 days wanders until it takes new birth. So during those 49 days, I've had students that had to take a semester off in order to be there for uncle, to be able to be at the temple every day offering prayers. And that's a way of vigil. In Hindu traditions, there's a shraddha where offerings are made and given to birds, given to be offered up in smoke as the body had been offered up in smoke to propitiate the ancestors. And that can be conducted on an annual basis.
I see.
In Hindu and the Upanishads, it says that it takes years of cycle, that the stuff that has been released at the time of cremation joins with the rain clouds, and those karmas come down into earth and grow up in plants, and then feed the animals, feed the humans. So it can take a long time for that process to unfold. And in the Jain tradition, they say, we are vigilant. And Jains have an autumn fast, 7 days and 7 nights that they aspire to complete. And they fast at least 2 times a month. And they do pratipramana, they do a repentance on a daily basis, a practice common throughout traditions, including with Jesuit Christian discernment. And they prepare for death in earnest in the last 1/3 of life. So that according to Jain tradition, you've already done all the ritual and you're the one doing it. So after the cremation, just move on and have remembrance, but no ceremony, because life itself, the gift of life, the gift of a vowed life, whether a monk, a nun, or a layperson, holding to letting go, okay, a little irony there, holding to being gentle. These are the ways in which one prepares for that blessed acceptance. Now, I'm going to share from the Vedanta tradition a little story of these 2 brothers that we see. And this is from a painting that is 500 years old. It was commissioned by Prince Salim, who was later killed by his brother Aurangzeb. But the Yogavasistha, a text beloved by Swami Shivananda, by Paramahansa, Ramakrishna, all of the great teachers revere this text, which reminds us of the fragility of life, reminds us of that human power of Parusha, and reminds us of the power of dream. And these 2 young men are in their own way mourning the loss of their father and their mother. And their father's name was Dirgatapa, described as a very accomplished tapasman, someone who has lived a life of tapas, rigor, of spiritual practice. And he'd reached 100 years old. And it says that when he gave up the body, it was as if a bird taking off in flight. And it was made very clear that this individual had achieved moksha. And some time had gone by, and their mother also just flew from the body like a bee from a flower and reached beyond the heavens, reached that place of moksha. And the brother on the right, Punya, whose name means merit, Punya did the necessary, lit the funeral pyre, said all of the prayers down on the banks of the Ganges. And this is at a place described in the Yogavasistha, a text compiled 1,000 years ago, a place called Triveni. And if you've been to Rishikesh, there is the Triveni Ghat. And every night they do a beautiful arati there. But the other brother, the one with not the prayer beads, but the one with the dupata, the one with the cloth, is disconsolate, and he weeps and he moans and he runs away into the forest and says, "Mommy, Daddy, how could you leave us?" And Punya goes after his brother and says, "Sit down. And please, take a look at that ridge there. Look carefully. Do you see those deer?" And I think all of us have, at various times in our life, seen deer and just rejoiced. And then Punya leans in and says, "Pavan, why are you mourning our parents? All beings come and go, and our parents once were deer, as beautiful as those deer on the ridge." And the discourse continues. And he takes him on a geographical, imaginary tour of all of India, and in different regions, different mountain ranges, at the banks of different rivers, tells the story of the tigers, tells the story of the magnificent trees, tells the story of the buzzing insects, and says, "You have been that, I have been that, our parents have been that. We need to accept the inevitable, and we need to celebrate." And this particular artist, very attentive. Take a look at that fish. That fish just looking up at Punya. And take a look at the bird in the sky, the birds, many birds in the sky. In nature, we find wisdom.
That was really beautiful. Thank you.
And thankfully, Pavan recovers and is able to integrate. We never leave behind those who have gone. We integrate their gifts into our own life.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask you one last question. Are there any yogic practices or movements that you want to share that can help with grief or that could help with this process?
Yeah, we would love to be symmetrical. By birth, we're never symmetrical. But by moving towards symmetry, we're able to settle into the heart. And there's a breathing exercise that easily one can find on YouTube, where you inhale left, hold, exhale right, hold, inhale right, hold, exhale left, hold.
Sure, I'm familiar with this. Can you give it a name in case viewers want to look
Yeah,
up?
Anuloma Viloma.
Okay.
And this will bring a calm. Many medical establishment tests have demonstrated the efficacy of this.
Right.
And another one that brings us sort of swayingly into a place of symmetry is just simply sit with your legs outstretched, and then bend forward and put your hands on the ground so that your legs, one leg that way, one leg the other way, your hands, palms up in front of them. And then sway to the right and sway to the left and look up and sway to the right and sway to the left. And do this about 5 times and then just settle in. And again, there's this balancing of sun and moon, this balancing of Ida and Pingala, this balancing of our energies, internal and external, that can bring us to that place of Asthita Prajna, bring us to that place of equipoise, and that place of yoga can bring some relief.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add or share?
Just the tenderness that I think we've all experienced these past few years, experiencing the pandemic, returning from the pandemic, learning and preparing for the chaos ahead. And with Hayam Dukkha Anagatam, that is anticipating that there is work to be done to minimize our pain, to minimize the pain of others, that we need to participate in what is called Pratiprasava. We need to call things back to their origins and tell the stories of why we are where we are and what we need to do in order to move forward. So that's, I think, the best that we can hope for.
Very meaningful and contemplative. Thank you. I'm going to leave it at that note. So thank you so much for joining me and the rest of us on this Yoga for Unity session. And hope to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Namaste.